My father stole my inheritance and gave it to his new family. I sued him to get it back. And no, I didn't think about how it would affect his other kids. He made his choice when he betrayed me. You're not going anywhere. My stepmother, Rachel, hissed into the phone, her voice a serrated edge of anger. Your father needs you here. Her words hung in the air, a noose tightening around my neck with every silent beat. I was 15, caught in a storm of emotions that seemed to have no end. My father, a man who once held the world in his hand, now held the purse strings of my future in a vice grip. But it's my money, I protested, the words barely a whisper as they trembled from my lips. Rachel had always had a way of making me feel small, insignificant, as if the air in the room was too thick to breathe. Your mother would have wanted this, she said, her voice now a patronizing coo. For the good of the family. The words stung, a sharp reminder of the woman whose love and protection I no longer had. My mother had died when I was 10, leaving behind a treasure trove of memories and a substantial inheritance that was meant for me. Or so I thought. My father, a man who had been a mere shadow in my life before Rachel had strutted into the picture, had other plans. He and Rachel had decided, in their infinite wisdom, to use the money to start a business that would support their new life together, their new family. I had been livid, arguing until my throat was raw, my eyes swollen from crying. But in the end, my voice was drowned out by theirs, the lawyers nodding in agreement, the papers signed without so much as a backward glance in my direction. Summary: to the power of one: Rachel, the narrator's stepmother, insists that the narrator should stay and support their family business, which was funded by the inheritance from her mother's will. Despite the narrator's protests that the money was meant for her, Rachel dismisses her feelings and invokes the memory of her mother, claiming it was her mother's wish. The narrator's objections are overruled by her father and Rachel, with the support of their lawyers. The house felt like a prison, my father and Rachel the jailers, their newfound business venture the bars that kept me caged. Every penny of my mother's hard-earned savings had been funneled into a dream that was not my own, a dream that grew more distant with each passing day as the reality of their greed became clear. My father's business, a quaint little bakery on the corner of Main and Oak, had become the center of their world. The sweet aroma of freshly baked bread and pastries filled the air, a mockery of the bitter taste in my mouth. Rachel, with her perfectly styled hair and apron that read Chef Mom, beamed with pride at every customer that walked through the door. My father, his eyes gleaming with a greed I didn't recognize, talked numbers and expansion like a man possessed. The walls of my bedroom grew thicker with every night spent listening to their plans, their laughter a taunting echo of the life I could have had. I clung to the few memories I had of my mother, her gentle touch and soothing lullabies a stark contrast to the coldness that now filled the hollow spaces in my heart. But as the months turned into years, a spark of defiance began to smolder within me. I would not let them win. I would not let them take what was rightfully mine and use it to build a life on the foundation of deceit. The day I turned 18, I packed my bags, my heart heavy but my resolve unwavering. I walked out of that house with a promise to myself and to my mother's memory: I would get that money back. And so began my quest for justice, a journey that would take me through the labyrinth of the legal system, pitting me against the very man who had once been my hero. I found an attorney, a stern-faced woman with a no-nonsense attitude and a reputation for fighting for the underdog. She listened to my story with a stoic expression, her eyes never leaving mine as the words of betrayal spilled from my lips. She took the case on with a firm nod, her handshake a silent promise of war. We filed the paperwork, the coldness of the courtroom seeping into my bones as I stood before a judge and accused my father of stealing my inheritance. The look of shock on Rachel's face was almost worth the years of pain and anger, but it was my father's expression that haunted me, a mix of defiance and something else, something that made my stomach turn. The battles in court were long and grueling. My father, a man who had always had a silver tongue, tried every trick in the book to weasel his way out of his responsibilities. But each time he spoke, each lie he told, only served to fuel the fire burning in my chest. I attended every hearing, my eyes never leaving him as he squirmed under the scrutiny of the law. Rachel would be there too, glaring at me from the sidelines, her children clutching her hand like lifelines, as if they could somehow pull her away from the wreckage she had helped to create. And then, after months of back and forth, the judge ruled in my favor. The bakery, their pride and joy, was to be sold to repay my stolen fortune. My father's jaw clenched, his fists tightened, but he said nothing as the gavel fell. The day of the sale was bittersweet. The bakery, once a symbol of their new life, was now a crumbling facade, a reminder of the greed that had torn us apart. Rachel's eyes were red-rimmed with tears as she watched the buyers take ownership, the children huddled around her, their faces a canvas of confusion and fear. But I felt nothing for them, not a flicker of pity. This was the price they had to pay for their deceit, for their greed. It was not my concern if it meant they had to tighten their belts or if it meant they could no longer afford the luxuries they had grown accustomed to. As I walked away from the shuttered bakery, a check for the full amount of my inheritance in hand, I knew that I had won. But the victory was hollow, the price of it too high. My relationship with my father, already strained, was now irrevocably broken, and the family ties that had once bound us together had been severed, leaving only a gaping chasm of anger and resentment in their place. Yet, as I looked at the check, the numbers blurring before my eyes, I realized that I had reclaimed a piece of my mother. The legacy she had left me, the love and security she had worked so hard to ensure, was now in my hands, and with it, a newfound strength to forge my own path, free from the shackles of the past. The whispers and accusations from my paternal relatives stung, but I knew that I had done what was right. I had stood up for myself, for my mother's memory, and for the future that had been stolen from me. I never looked back, the wind of freedom at my back as I stepped into the world, ready to build a life that was truly mine, on my terms, with the funds that were always meant to be mine. But the question lingered, a thorn in my side: was I the villain in this story for not considering the fate of my half-siblings, or was I simply a daughter seeking justice for the mother she had lost too soon? The debate raged on in my mind, a silent storm that I knew would never truly abate. Yet, as I drove away from the town that had held me captive for so long, the only thing I felt was a quiet resolve. I had done what I needed to do, and I would not apologize for it. The future was now my own, and I would shape it as I saw fit. But the whispers of doubt remained, echoing through the quiet moments of my newfound independence. The check in my hand was cold comfort as I faced the stark reality of my family's fragmentation. I knew that I could never trust my father again, and the thought of Rachel and her children suffering because of their greed was a knot in my stomach that I refused to untangle. With the inheritance restored, I moved to the city, eager to escape the claustrophobic confines of the small town that had been the backdrop of my betrayal. The anonymity of urban life was a balm to my weary soul. The years passed swiftly as I worked tirelessly to build a life that honored my mother's memory. I studied hard, secured a good job, and made a name for myself in a way that she would have been proud of. Yet, the shadow of the bakery, and the family I had left behind, never fully receded. Occasionally, I would bump into relatives from my father's side at weddings or funerals, their eyes filled with a mix of pity and accusation. They spoke in hushed tones about the children, about how they were doing, and each time, the question of my guilt would resurface, demanding an answer I never had. But as I grew older, I realized that the anger I had once felt had transformed into something more complex. It was not just about the money, it was about the betrayal, the theft of the love and care that the money represented. It was about the loss of innocence and the shattering of the illusion of family. And so, with a heavy heart, I made a decision. I would not allow their actions to define me, to burden me with guilt for something that was never mine to carry. Instead, I would use the inheritance to build a legacy of my own, one that honored my mother's memory in a way that was true to her spirit, with kindness, with generosity, and with a fierce determination to do what was right. The whispers of doubt grew fainter as I donated to charities, started a scholarship in her name, and helped others who had been wronged in similar ways. I knew that she would be proud of the woman I had become, the one who stood firm in the face of adversity and never let anger or bitterness consume her. When I looked in the mirror, I saw not a cold-hearted monster, but a survivor, a woman who had claimed her birthright and used it to make a difference in the world. And as the years marched on, the echoes of that fateful day grew quieter, overshadowed by the life I had created from the ashes of their greed. In the end, it was not about the money. It was about the principles that had been so callously discarded. It was about the love my mother had left me, a love that could never be stolen, no matter how much they had tried. And as I stood tall, my eyes fixed firmly on the horizon, I knew that the woman who had raised me, the woman who had loved me more than any treasure, would be proud of the choices I had made. The years in the city brought with them a sense of freedom that I had never known before. With each step I took, each challenge I faced, I grew stronger, more resilient. I built a career that allowed me to give back to the community, to help others who had been dealt a similar hand of fate. I surrounded myself with friends who became my chosen family, their support a beacon in the dark. And as the whispers of the past grew quieter, I found myself at a crossroads. I had built a life that was mine, a life that was good, but there was still something missing, something that tugged at the very fabric of my being, a question that had remained unanswered for too long. What kind of person was I to ignore the plight of my half-siblings? It was then that I decided to reach out to them, to offer an olive branch, to see if there was any hope for reconciliation. The letters I wrote were returned unopened, the phone calls unanswered. But I did not give up. I knew that the path to healing was a long one, and it was paved with pebbles of understanding, not bricks of anger. One day, I received a call from Rachel. Her voice, once sharp and demanding, was now tremulous, filled with a desperation that made me pause. She spoke of the struggles her children faced, the hardships that had come from the dissolution of their family's business, the resentment they held for me. And in that moment, I felt a twinge of something I had not felt in a long time: empathy. I invited Rachel and the kids to meet me, not in the shadow of the old bakery, but in a neutral place, a park where the only scent was of freshly cut grass and the only sounds were the laughter of children playing. As I watched them approach, I felt a knot in my stomach. Would they spit in my face? Would they reject me outright? But as we sat down on the bench, the sun warming our backs, Rachel's eyes searched mine, looking for something I wasn't sure I had to give. "I'm sorry," she said finally, her voice thick with unshed tears. "We had no right to take what wasn't ours. We were just trying to build something together." I nodded, the weight of her words sinking deep into my soul. "I know," I said softly, "but what you did hurt me. It hurt us all." The children, now young adults, looked at me with a mix of curiosity and hostility. They had grown up hearing only one side of the story, a story where I was the villain. I took a deep breath and told them my truth: the pain of watching my inheritance be siphoned away, the anger that had fueled my quest for justice. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the city, Rachel reached out a tentative hand. "Can you forgive us?" she asked, her voice barely audible. And as I took her hand in mine, feeling the warmth of her skin, I knew that I could. Not for her, not for my father, but for me. For the girl who had been robbed of her mother's love, for the woman I had become, and for the future that stretched out before me. We talked into the evening, the air thick with the unspoken words of a past that could never be changed. But as the stars began to twinkle in the sky, a sense of peace settled over me. Maybe, just maybe, there was room for healing in this fractured family. As I drove home that night, the check still in my pocket, I knew that I had made the right choice. It was time to let go of the anger and the bitterness that had shaped my life for so long. It was time to embrace the future, to build bridges instead of walls. The inheritance was just a number in a bank account, a means to an end. But the love and legacy my mother had left me was priceless, a gift that could not be stolen or sold. And as I looked at the city lights, my heart felt lighter than it had in years. I had won the battle, but the war was far from over. It was a war of hearts and minds, a war against the darkness that greed had brought into our lives. But with each act of kindness, each gesture of forgiveness, I knew that the tides were turning. I began to see Rachel and the kids regularly, sharing meals and stories, trying to build a new kind of relationship. It was awkward at first, filled with long pauses and forced smiles, but over time, we found common ground. They had suffered too, caught in the crossfire of my father's greed and the collapse of their family's dreams. The kids grew to understand that I was not the enemy, just a girl who had been fighting for what she believed was rightfully hers. Rachel, though still a thorn in my side, softened, and I saw in her eyes a reflection of the woman I had once called Mom. We talked about the good times, the moments we had shared before the betrayal had colored everything. Slowly, I started to realize that the money was not the root of the issue. It was the symbol of what had been lost. The love, the trust, the family we could have had if not for the greed that had torn us apart. And so, with a heavy heart, I made another decision. I would not keep the inheritance as a trophy of victory, a constant reminder of the past. Instead, I would use it to help my siblings, to give them opportunities that their mother would have wanted for them. I set up a trust fund, ensuring that the money would be there for their education, for their futures, for the moments that mattered most. The day I handed Rachel the papers was one of the hardest of my life. Her eyes searched mine, looking for the girl she had once stepped over in her quest for a better life. And in that moment, I knew that the cycle of anger and resentment could end with me. As the years passed, I watched my siblings grow, flourish, and find their own paths, free from the shackles of our shared history. Rachel and I had our moments, but we had found a fragile peace, built on the foundation of regret and hope. The whispers from my paternal relatives grew softer, replaced by nods of respect and the occasional tentative smile. They had seen the change in me, the growth that came from forgiveness. And as for my father, well, that was a chapter of my life that remained closed. But the anger had lost its edge, and in its place grew a strange sort of pity for a man who had thrown away so much for so little. The city had become my home, a place where the echoes of the past were drowned out by the rhythm of my own making. I had built a life that was more than just a response to the injustice I had suffered. It was a life that honored my mother's legacy, a life filled with love, compassion, and a fierce determination to do good. Looking back, I knew that the journey had been long and painful, but it had led me to a place of peace. I had taken the poison of their greed and transformed it into something beautiful. And as I stood tall in the light of a new day, the whispers of doubt had finally been silenced. But fate had one more twist to throw into the mix. Rachel, now frail and gray, called me to her side. Her eyes, once so full of anger and spite, were now clouded with regret and pain. "I need to tell you something," she rasped, her hand trembling as she clutched a letter to her chest. "It was me. I was the one who convinced your father to use your inheritance." The room spun as her words hit me like a sledgehammer. The woman who had once been a mother figure to me had been the architect of my pain. Rachel, whose very existence had been a thorn in my side, had orchestrated the theft that had haunted me for years. I stared at her, my heart racing as she continued to speak, her voice barely a whisper. "I had debts," she said, "debts that were eating away at me, and when your mother passed, the idea it seemed like the only way." "The letter," she explained, "was a confession she had written to my father before his passing, detailing her role in the theft and her deep regret. She had held on to it, hoping that one day she could find the courage to tell me herself. But now, with her own mortality staring her down, she could no longer bear the weight of her secret. Her confession hung in the air like a dark cloud, threatening to dampen the light I had worked so hard to cultivate. But as I looked into her eyes, I saw something else, a desperate plea for forgiveness. The anger that had fueled my fight for justice now felt like a burden I no longer needed to carry. Rachel had stolen my money, but in doing so, she had also given me a gift, the strength to stand up for myself, the wisdom to forgive, and the courage to move forward. "I forgive you," I said, the words surprising even me. "But you need to know, Rachel, that what you did was wrong, and you need to live with that." Her shoulders slumped in relief, and she nodded, the tears tracking down her cheeks. "I will," she murmured. "I have been living with it every day." With Rachel's confession, a weight lifted from my shoulders. I had faced the woman who had hurt me the most and offered her the one thing she had never given me: compassion. The trust fund remained in place, a testament to the power of forgiveness and the legacy of the mother I had lost. Rachel and I continued to see each other, our relationship a fragile dance of understanding and acceptance. The city that had once felt like a prison was now a playground, full of potential and promise. With the shadow of the past behind me, I could finally see the future stretched out before me, a canvas waiting to be painted with the colors of my choosing. And as Rachel slipped away into the quiet embrace of death, I knew that she had found peace in her final moments, her heart lighter because of my forgiveness. The twisted knot of our history had been untangled, leaving only the threads of a shared humanity. I stood at her graveside, the letter she had given me clutched in my hand. It was a reminder that life is full of twists and turns, that sometimes the villains are more complex than we care to admit. But it was also a testament to the fact that even in the darkest moments, there is always the possibility for growth and redemption. The whispers of doubt had been replaced with the gentle rustling of leaves, the soft hum of the city, and the echoes of a mother's love that had never truly left me. And as I turned to walk away from the cemetery, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow on the path ahead. I knew that the future held challenges and heartaches, but I also knew that I was ready to face them, armed with the wisdom of my past and the strength of my mother's love. I was no longer a girl fighting for her inheritance. I was a woman forging her own destiny. The story of the stolen inheritance had come full circle, leaving behind a legacy not of anger and resentment, but of forgiveness and hope. And as I stepped into the world, the wind at my back, I knew that I had truly claimed the treasure that was always meant to be mine, the freedom to choose who I was and what kind of person I wanted to become. The confession from Rachel had shaken me to my core. The woman who had once been my stepmother, the one who had brought so much pain and turmoil into my life, was now begging for absolution. It was a twist I never saw coming, a revelation that made me question everything I had known about the woman who had raised me as her own. As she lay on her deathbed, her eyes clouded by the weight of her guilt, I found myself in a position of power I had never dreamed of. I could have crushed her spirit, made her final moments a living hell, but instead, I offered her the one thing she had never given me: understanding. I saw the fear in her eyes, the desperation to set things right before it was too late, and in that moment, I knew that holding on to anger would only serve to keep me trapped in the past. The trust fund remained a symbol of hope, a beacon of light in the lives of my half-siblings. I watched from afar as they grew, their futures now secure thanks to the love and sacrifice of a mother who had never wanted them to suffer. Rachel's betrayal had become a strange kind of gift, one that had led to a path of healing and growth. But the confession had also left me with a newfound burden. The anger I had felt towards my father was now a tangle of conflicting emotions. I had always seen him as the villain, the one who had taken from me without a second thought. But now, I realized, he had been as much a victim of Rachel's greed as I had been. The relationship with my siblings grew stronger with each passing year. We shared a bond that went beyond blood, a bond forged in the fire of betrayal and loss. We had survived the storm that had torn our family apart, and we were now building a new one from the ashes. And as for Rachel, her legacy was not one of deceit and greed, but of a woman who had faced her mistakes and sought redemption. Her confession was a stark reminder that no one is ever truly beyond saving, that even in the darkest of hearts, there is the potential for change. The city lights twinkled in the distance, a reflection of the stars in my mother's eyes that had always guided me. Rachel had taken so much from me, but in the end, she had also given me a gift of understanding, of compassion, and of the power to forgive. The whispers of the past had been silenced, replaced by the hum of a life lived with purpose. I had claimed what was rightfully mine, not just the money, but the strength to move beyond the shackles of anger and bitterness. And as I looked to the future, I knew that the woman I had become was one my mother would have been proud of. Years later, Rachel's children approached me with a tentative proposal. They had grown into strong, capable adults, and they had a vision, a bakery of their own, a place where they could honor their mother's memory and build a new family legacy. The irony was not lost on me, but I saw the hope in their eyes, the same hope that had once burned in Rachel's. But this time, it was not tainted by greed. We sat around the table, a map of the city sprawled before us, each of us with a pen in hand, scribbling notes and ideas. The air was alive with excitement, a stark contrast to the tension that had once suffocated our family gatherings. The siblings I had once feared were now my partners in a venture that promised to be so much more than just a business. We worked tirelessly, each of us bringing our unique talents to the table. Rachel's kids had inherited their mother's entrepreneurial spirit, and together we created a place that was more than just a bakery. It was a sanctuary of warmth and comfort, a place where the scent of fresh bread mingled with the sweet aroma of possibility. The opening day was a celebration of new beginnings, the laughter and chatter of our customers a symphony that drowned out the echoes of our painful history. We had come together, not just as siblings, but as a team with a shared vision. We had reclaimed what had once been lost to us, and in doing so, we had forged a bond that was unbreakable. The bakery grew, a beacon of hope in a town that had once been a battleground. The money that Rachel had stolen had become the seed of something beautiful, something that transcended the greed that had once threatened to destroy us. And as we watched our customer smiles grow with every bite of our creations, I knew that the true treasure was not the inheritance, but the love and trust we had found in each other. The whispers of doubt had been replaced by the sweet whispers of success, the gentle hum of a family that had chosen to heal. The bakery, a symbol of the mother we had lost, had become a place of redemption, a testament to the power of forgiveness and the strength of the human spirit. As we locked up for the night, my half-siblings and I shared a knowing glance. We had faced the demons of our past and emerged stronger, ready to conquer whatever lay ahead. The city skyline was a canvas of endless potential, and we were the artists, painting our futures with the vibrant colors of love, hope, and a legacy restored.